So, I watch the news pretty closely, and just recently I saw a report about riots and protests in Nepal, which led to a fall of the government in Nepal. And like most South Africans, I wouldn't have thought too much of it. And then I thought, hang on a second, there's something here. Now, I'm sure many of us would struggle to find Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and Nepal on the map. But do you know that recently all three of them have had massive protests that led to a fall in the government? Now, don't switch off just yet, because this isn't about politics of those countries. It's more about what led to the problems that they had. Because those problems that they had in Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and Nepal are almost identical to the problems we've got in South Africa. What are those problems? Well, deep, deep, deep corruption within government, endemic corruption in government, as well as inequality, nepotism. In other words, those people related to government that were making a lot of money. And then massive unemployment, especially amongst the youth. Now, just tell me when this starts sounding familiar. In each of those countries, what happened? These protests got started by young people who felt excluded from the economy. They started to protest. Like usual, governments respond in exactly the wrong way. They send in people with guns and bullets. Start killing people. The protests start growing. So let's see what happened in those countries, because in each one of them, there's one or two little differences, but you'll find them alive in South Africa. So in Bangladesh, the big issue there, along with the corruption, you had a party that had served for 40 years. You've got an economy that's not growing. You've got poverty, all sorts of things, inequality. The issue there became merit appointments. You could only get a job if you were related to somebody in government. You could only get a decent job if you're a minister's son or daughter. This led to protests, which led to their Prime Minister, Sheikh Hasina, fleeing to India. New government in place. There we go. Sri Lanka. This happened 2 years ago. Their president, Rajapaksa, was also forced to flee. Why? Sri Lanka had an economic collapse, basically the same thing we live through every day. No growth, big unemployment, no prospects. Soon enough, people take to the streets. Out goes that president. Nepal. Young people were so angered by the way that the country was run that they actually put the Gen Z was what they actually wrote on their clothing to show people who's actually doing this protest, that it was young people that was doing this. In fact, they got so angry that they burnt down Parliament building. They burnt down the headquarters of the ruling party, which was the Congress Party. It's always a Congress Party. And when you've got Congress in your name, you just know that it's never going to end well. And they even burned down the Prime Minister's home. So the Prime Minister, Sharma Oli, had to step down in Nepal. So, I started to think to myself, could this happen in South Africa? Well, let's just see. South Africa's got massive corruption. The government seems to be quite comfortable with that corruption. They seem to want to do nothing about it. We've got a very bad economy that isn't growing. It's not absorbing people. Therefore, we've got massive unemployment, 62% youth unemployment. These are big, big issues. We've got service delivery problems. You can't get services out there. There's not one place outside of the Western Cape that has got reliable service delivery. You've got nepotism. We call it cadre deployment. One of the trigger points in Nepal was that some of the children of the politicians were happy to flaunt their wealth. Well, in South Africa, we've been happy to flaunt our wealth, and we see all the time those politically connected tenderpreneurs, the guys with a pointy shoes and suits and buying bottles of champagne and driving around in many cars and owning many homes. In fact, we've got some people in government. We've got a deputy president who's got houses worth 70 million rand. He's never been in business. So every country that has had these protests and these uprisings, which has led to political changes, has a trigger event, something that sets it off. We mentioned some already. In Nepal, it was the children of politicians on social media showing everybody how rich they were. And so it goes. We saw with the Arab Spring that the trigger event was a fruit vendor, a street vendor, who after he was disrespected by a government official, set himself alight in the city square. And this triggered protests and revolutions all around the region of Africa, in the Middle East, that led to the Arab Spring. Nepal, after everybody was so angered by children of politicians flaunting their wealth on social media, that the government thought it was a good idea to close down social media. So they did that. That's what led to the really bad protests. So what would be the trigger event in South Africa? My money would be that it would be a collection of things, but it would probably get set off by something we're starting to see here in Johannesburg. And that is something like the lack of water being delivered. When you turn on the taps and nothing happens. Because that affects everybody. And after a while, after a week without water, you start getting angry. It's not like many of our cities you can go down to the river. So how about a situation that you have a water delivery protest in Johannesburg, which spreads to other cities and towns where they've got their own problems? Perhaps it's electricity. Perhaps it's the roads that are unusable. Perhaps it's just the rampant corruption. But the bottom line is you've got a level of anger that is spread throughout the country, that one incident gives rise to another, to another, to another. Now, that's a kind of trigger event I would imagine could happen in South Africa. The government probably thinks, because we hear it all the time in their speeches, is that when they talk about angry youth, they imply that they're going to come after white people because we are rich. I don't think so. I got a feeling they're going to go after the government because they're corrupt. I think people are a little smarter than that, than what the ANC gives them credit for. I got a feeling that the first buildings they're going to burn down are going to be government buildings. Sure, they'll go after the shopping centers, nice gleaming shopping centers full of stuff. They're going to be looted and then they're going to be set alight. But the real anger is going to be government buildings. What happens then? Well, we see that all the makings are there for this kind of problem. We can see it in the way that the country has rallied behind the allegations of General Mkhwanazi, because it feels like we finally got somebody who cares for us, because we know that our politicians don't. They won't do their jobs. They just keep on wanting commissions of inquiries or dialogues or anything except action, and definitely not in favor of the people. We see that the government doesn't care when companies close down in the country. They won't do anything about it. They understand that the government flies internationally and goes and tells Iran that you're their best friend, but they don't go down to the motor shop, the motor plant that had to close down because of disinvestment, or the steel plants. So we understand that the people are really, really angry. This is what gives rise to protests. Government doing nothing about it. And the government makes this idea that the problems that we have in this country are racial. And when people have service delivery, it's because of apartheid. Well, I don't think that's the case, because they know that ShopRite Checkers is open and it's stocks on its shelves. They like KFC. But they know that they have to stand in a queue at the local hospital. So I would be reluctant to say that the anger of the people would be pointed towards a particular racial group. I don't think that. I think that's old-fashioned thinking. I think the anger is at the people who aren't delivering the services, that aren't creating the opportunity. You see, countries that we've mentioned, we spoke about the Arab Spring, we spoke about Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal. The real problem was that nobody cared about the future of young people. Now, I'm not, despite the way it may seem to you, I'm not as young as you may think. But I do understand that when you're young, you see the world very differently. You've got your life ahead of you. You don't want somebody to tell you, just wait 10 years. No, and neither should you. Your life's to be lived now. You want to earn your own, make your own way in life. You want to make your own future. And to have your own government working against you is what makes you angry. Now, the government can try and say all they like, that the problem is that we don't have enough BEE deals. But I'm not sure that the country and the population, especially the young people in our country, see it the same way. They're seeing an economy that isn't working. But yet, politicians that drive around in blue lights brigades, they see massive corruption. It's in the news every day. We report on it every day. We know, we saw the Zondo Commission, but nothing is done about it. So I don't think that the government has evaluated this properly. And I think that they keep on thinking that they're safe. This is not a government problem. Everybody loves the government. That's why 40% of them voted for us. I don't think that's the case. I get a feeling that there is bubbling anger that is going to boil over. I think the only thing that keeps us safe for now is that we're quite a big place. People aren't as crammed in as what they are in other countries, which means that protests generally work a little slower in South Africa. But I've been around this country where little events have triggered big protests and big actions, little things, little bad decisions. Do you think back in 1976, the National Party would think that by changing the language rules in black schools would lead to the Soweto riots of 1976 and the riots that spread across the country? No. They probably thought this is just a bureaucratic decision. We'll get this through. We've got guns. We can stop any problem that we may have. No, it was a stupid little decision that led to mass protests. Because why? Not because of that decision alone, but because of all the anger that had built up until that moment. You know, it's like, just think of your own life. When have you done something really silly? You were probably triggered by something really stupid and then went totally over the top because you were so angered by other parts of your life. We are sitting in South Africa with a problem. We've got an economy that's not growing. We've got massive youth unemployment. And we've got a whole lot of people that look and do not see a future for themselves. This is exactly what happened in the countries that I've spoken about today. So I would suggest that perhaps if you're an ANC minister and you're watching this, because we know that they do watch this, by the way, perhaps you should go have a nice look at what happened in Sri Lanka and Bangladesh and Nepal, and maybe say, perhaps the real issue in South Africa is the economy, because that's what leads to anger, that's what leads to resentments, and that's what leads to protests ultimately. I hope that our politicians get this before it's too late, because the situation in South Africa looks mighty similar to what's happened in those countries. Thank you so much for joining me. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and we'll see you again on the weekly update only on the State of the Nation.